Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the top 3 disaster recovery trends at VMworld. We have some really exciting presenters for you with almost 6 years of IT experience, and they'll be talking about those trends. So specifically, we're going to be talking about the BCDR trends for virtualized mission-critical applications. We will look at the impact of virtualization on mission-critical applications, how that changes the BCDR approach, and how we can simplify that approach within the context of virtualization, and what this means for the cloud. We will be covering some technical content, but we'll not be going too deep. At the end of the presentation, we have contact information, so if you're interested in a more technical discussion, please reach out to one of the panelists, and you can always go to www.zerto.com. And at the end, you can see we'll have plenty of time for question and answers. So as I mentioned, we have 3 great presenters for you today. So first we have Gabrie van Zanten. He's a vExpert and author of his blog, Gabe's Virtual World. And he'll be talking about virtualizing mission-critical applications. And then we have Levonai, the VP of Marketing and Products at Zerto, and he'll be talking about simplifying BCDR specifically for those virtualized applications. And then lastly, we have Shannon Snowden, who's a VMware consultant. He has his own blog and has lots of experience with VMware and virtualization, and he'll be talking about the impact of BCDR on the cloud. So I'll turn it over to Gabe to get started.
Hi, good evening, everybody. So nowadays, with virtualization reaching mission-critical apps, we see that more and more products have reached a maturity state that you can move to the next slide. Have a maturity state that means that all critical applications, mission-critical applications, can now be virtualized. Important fact is that the market and products, third-party products that are helping you with your virtualization also have matured now. We have monitoring in place. We have very good backup solutions. We have disaster recovery solutions. And an other important part is that performance is no longer a barrier. Most companies nowadays also have a new policy that a new server that has to be delivered will first be delivered as a virtual machine, and only if it really doesn't work for some reason, then we are allowed to make it a physical machine. So virtualization also is more and more becoming a route for the cloud. You see most companies using more and more cloud-based applications, but also moving their own virtual machines to a cloud provider to get better guarantee on uptime and availability. But there's also some speed bumps ahead. On the next slide, you'll see that most replication and disaster recovery techniques that were used in the physical world, they are now being transformed into the virtual world. So companies that have been using products like Recovery Point or SnapMail or using area-based replication, you'll often see that they now try to fit their virtual environment onto the same products, and that's where often things go wrong, because you can use those old products for a virtual environment, but when they really don't talk to each other, when the virtual environment and the physical environment don't have an idea what the other one is doing, then you'll notice that when needed in a disaster recovery scenario, then there's a script that doesn't work, a boss hanging over your shoulder looking with you, and that's where things go really wrong. So what we see is that lots of scripts are needed to make physical environments and replications work for virtual environments. And that's also where things can go wrong very badly. When we look at the perception of how companies nowadays have their data recovery and virtualization compared to what's in reality being used. Now, the perception is that array-based replication works fine in virtual environments. But like I said, it often comes back to a product that was made for a physical environment and is now kept alive using a lot of scripts to make things work. When we're looking at, for example, VMware SRM, then you clearly see a product that's directed at array-based replication. You put virtual machines on a LUN, and you replicate that LUN to another environment. And when you want to do a failover, you have to failover the complete LUN and all the VMs on it. So it is aware of the virtual environment in the fact that it works nicely with vCenter. But actually, SRM is not really aware of your applications. So you still have a core issue that you have with when using physical, the old physical technique for array replication, and that is that your disaster recovery technique doesn't really understand your virtual environment. Another perception is that snapshots and backup provide a good virtual replication solution and a DR solution. But when you're using a backup product that also can replicate and has to make snapshots all the time to keep some sort of sync between the sites, then you'll notice that there's a performance degradation because you're constantly putting snapshots on your virtual machines. If you don't want to use those snapshots but use something like a backup technology, then the problem is that you maybe half a day or maybe a day that you're out of sync. So those are the three biggest challenges when talking about DR virtualization. What we see with hypervisors is that at first, of course, the servers went into the hypervisor. And the next step was that networking moved into the hypervisor layer. When we now look at all the techniques that are available in the VMware environment, but also in competing products, then we see more and more that networking has moved into the hypervisor. And with VMware bringing products like vShield, we also see that security has moved into the hypervisor. So why not also move replication into the hypervisor? Because the hypervisor is really aware of what your virtual machines are doing and how they belong to each other. So in the next slide, you'll see that with replication at a hypervisor layer, we can easily protect mission-critical applications. Because now we can create a virtual protection group in which you specify which virtual machines together make a virtual application. And in this way, your replication technique knows about what VMs have to be recovered at the same time. And you're you don't have to be aware of any LUNs that you're connected to. So storage vMotion, HA, normal vMotion, and VApps, they can all, they don't influence your virtual protection group anymore. So this is a better protection for your application because you don't want to really recover virtual machines on the second data center. What you want to recover in a disaster recovery scenario is your service. And your service is one or two virtual applications, depending on, for example, Exchange, having all your domain controllers, having the Exchange server, having the web front end for your Exchange. That together would, for example, be such a virtual protection group. So that is the biggest takeaway from this, that moving from old-based, array-based replication into virtual protection groups. Gil, it's up to you.
Thank you very much, Gabe. So first of all, before I move on, I would like to remind everybody you have the Ask a Question button on your top left of your screen. Please use that. We did allocate a lot of time for a Q&A because we want to make this a panel discussion also, since we have these two great V experts here with us, Shannon and Gabe. And as Gabe said, mission critical applications are, all these production tier 1 applications are hitting the virtualization and are now virtualized more than ever. But there's lots of issues with how do I protect them in terms of disaster recovery, because all legacy technologies don't really fit the virtualization paradigm in so many ways. Now let's look at another trend, which is okay. One of the reasons people go to virtualization in the first place is because there's this promise that everything will be simple. Okay, provisioning new virtual machines will be simple. Scaling up, scaling down applications will be simple. Utilizing my resources will be simpler. I will be able to move things around. I will be able to make much better use of my infrastructure. And to an extent, this is really the reality. In many cases, virtualization really have made our life as an IT administrator much, much simpler. Another promise that many people have thought is that virtualization can also make disaster recovery simpler. And let's look at what does it mean to have a simpler disaster recovery. It means that you think that, hey, once I have a virtual environment, it's much easier to set up a disaster recovery because I can move things around. I have granularity of, yes, that virtual machine only runs this application, or this group of virtual machines run a specific application, just as Gabe mentioned. Let's group them together and a disaster recovery. Whenever I want to scale up, scale down an application, add a server, yes, it will be also that simple to protect them. Also testing. Now that I can, create virtual machines on the fly and configure the networking on the fly, recovering and in a test scenario on my recovery site, that would be an very easy and simple task. Failover should be a breeze. Failback, same thing. Everything should actually be very, very simple. That's kind of like one of the hidden promises of virtualization. Because I'm working on a virtual environment, on a virtual infrastructure, disaster recovery is going to be very, very simple. The truth is, that's not the case. Okay? We see here on the screen in a minute a long quote from a customer complaining about, even though he's using the virtualization, there's still lots of scripting around, lots of things that needs to happen anytime you change your application. Anytime you are scaling up or scaling down or moving things around or adding a new host, you need to go back and forth with your disaster recovery solution and your virtualization management, because they don't fit together, just as Gabe said. And actually, it didn't make life simpler. To look at a very simple example, in this slide here, we see how kind of like in an array-based replication situation, if you are trying to protect an application that consists of a number of VMs, you first have to go for a full storage mapping of understanding, okay, where are these VMs, which loons they are on. You have to consolidate some loons. You have to move some of the VMs from those loons. You have to allocate for some extra space for these loons, etc. Then you have to do the same thing exactly on the other side, because array replication requires you to have identical storage plus identical setup. Then you have to go to your actual replication management software and configure all the replication there. Then you have to go to an SRM or anything like that to configure scripting, etc. It's a very long, very cumbersome process that you need to repeat every time you change anything in your application or you change anything in your infrastructure. which make it really complex, really inflexible, exactly the opposite of what you were looking for in the virtual world. And what the promise was, hey, in the virtual world, I will have very, very simple disaster recovery. The good news is that newer technologies like hypervisor-based replication are solving this, because when you do have replication, when you do have disaster recovery built into the hypervisor layer, you don't care about storage because it's all storage agnostic. You don't care what storage you have on which side. You can have a SAN on one side and a NAS on the other side. It can be an INC on one side, NetApp on the other side. You can have a different LAN setup. You can have your application running on 5 different LANs on one side while using only another LAN on the other side. So the whole process becomes really, really the simple process you were looking for with disaster recovery. You just choose a number of VMs, you start replicating them to the target site, and whenever you want to do a failover or a test, you just click a button, and with the automation built into these solutions, you get the entire process being done within minutes, the entire failover process, either in a test scenario or in a failback scenario or in a failover scenario, doesn't matter which side. And also with all kinds of multi-site capabilities, you can actually protect between different sites and have multiple workloads going multiple ways between different sites. So really, with hypervisor-based replication, that's what you get. You do get the simple disaster recovery that virtualization has promised. If we look at a specific case study from one of Zerto's customers, they have really dramatically reduced the complexity of the day-to-day operations of their entire IT, because everything in their production applications needs to be protected, being a bank, and they now have a much easier process to change anything in their infrastructure. Plus, they reduced their costs, both on the number of LANs they needed, because they don't need to have the specific size LANs anymore. They can just, they're fully granular. They work at the virtual machine and the virtual disk level. They don't care about LAN sizing. They reduce the bandwidth requirements because they replicate only what they need and not what they don't need. So eventually, this really resulted in a lot of savings for them. So, just a quick reminder before we move on to Shannon, that is again the questions. You can always please use the Ask a Question button on the top left corner to ask as many questions as you like, because after Shannon will talk to us and explain a bit about what does the cloud do in the BCDR space, we will go back to and start answering some questions from the audience. So Shannon, it's all yours.
Thank you, Gil. First thing I want to look at is, I want to echo some of the things that Gabe and Gil both have detailed out a little bit more, but I'd like to talk about the trend of BCDR for the cloud as being, I really think it's now ready to take off as a key first win in a lot of cases for organizations, and also for cloud providers, it's much more feasible for them to be able to offer it now. So I think it's really primed now with hypervisor-based replication to become a trend that picks up steam starting now and going forward, because it's a good point solution for a lot of people. And I want to look at three different perspectives and first analyze what's prevented DR to the cloud, and then I want to look at it from the customer side of why haven't people adopted that, and also what's changed from the cloud provider side. And really, it comes down to what Gabe talked about with the need for simplification, and also what Gil talked about with the big simple slide there. It has to be much simpler, because I've worked for nearly a year doing array-based DR, primarily with SRM, but also working with Zerto. And the contrast between the two products and deployments is very, very great, because what you have to do with array-based replication, like Gabe was showing, is you have to collect all of those VMs and you have to put them on replicated storage. So there's a lot of SV motion or copying once you've identified the actual applications and the VMs that are associated with them. So you have to make sure that you've collected all of those and get them on replicated storage. Who normally does that? The responsibility for that is more the application owner team. So it's not so much your infrastructure teams getting to deal with it, which typically your infrastructure people are the VMware team that's running this. So you get this association with the VMware team and the storage team, and they have to come together and agree upon the fact that the volumes that are going to be replicated, and then the next thing is more of a political thing, with rightfully so. The storage team has to embrace or at least accept the fact that there's going to be something external that's kind of out of their control with administrative access to their storage arrays on both the primary and recovery sites. Because the steps needed, the scripts, as Gabe talked about, the scripts in the SRAs are asking snapshots to be created and deleted, replication to be stopped and started. So if you think about the business and technical challenges internally, just to get an internal inside a company's own cloud or own network providing DR, you compound that when you add in a cloud provider, because not only do you have your own internal silos to overcome, and even if you don't have the silos, just the logistics of tying all this together, we're adding in a DR cloud provider into the fact that we're going to have storage sitting external to your organization that actually has admin level access to your array inside your network. And that has been a real barrier to prevent the DR to the cloud from really taking off. And so at the core of this a lot is going back to the array-based replication. And array-based replication is almost counter to what we accomplished with server virtualization to begin with. Server virtualization got us away from depending on hardware, and while the array-based DR with particularly SRM, once it's configured, it works just fine. There's still the inflexible requirements that have to happen with the array-based replication, such as getting all the VMs grouped together in the right storage volumes and getting those replicated. So we are somewhat dictated by hardware once again that we had freed ourselves from on the server side. And so the lack of cloud providers offering DR was pretty obvious because they looked at their cost. And if they're doing nearly a one-to-one storage array to a client, their utilization rates aren't very high. And it's just not a good cost model for them to pursue. So we can move to the next slide, Gil. So let's look at it from the customer side. Now, I just talked about a lot of the challenges that they have as far as getting the array-based replication going with DR. But now, with hypervisor-based replication, which frees us from array-based constraints, we're not really so much worried about what data store those VMs are on. It really doesn't matter. In fact, you don't even have to have shared storage and just have them on local storage if you want. It doesn't matter. So we've got a bit of a timing thing with the technology underneath has now offered up a very legitimate enterprise solution for replication. And the confluence of that with the maturity of the people who would be using it that are used to working with services. And so the first wave of virtualization was really for low-hanging fruits, what I call it. It's the lesser important in some ways, but still production servers. But the RTO and RPO requirements weren't as aggressive. So now we're getting, as Gabe talked about, mission-critical applications. The most mission-critical applications are being put on virtualization platforms because, in fact, you often see that they're going to have higher uptimes than their physical counterparts, and that's what virtualization has matured and proved itself to be able to do. So the business managers that are working with all of this have now become used to services-based approach. They use it personally for Amazon, and then they circumvent the work file server by going to Dropbox, and then they're watching movies with Netflix. And so they've sort of fed that into the business processes too, of things like Salesforce and hosted email and their corporate websites are all services that a customer that has had good success with virtualization itself, and now that they're putting things on their most mission critical servers on virtualization and entrusting those to it, they want to get away from the old physical way of trying to do DR, because virtualization offers that. But it was a little bit harder with array-based than it is with hypervisor-based now. So next slide, Gil. So from the cloud provider side, the key here is flexibility. They're now able to offer enterprise hypervisor-based solutions to clients because they're not concerned about the storage. They don't have to have a matching storage array at their site that matches a client's site down to the firmware level, and permissions on storage that not every LUN or volume that's on that storage is actually being replicated. You've got all your production LUNs that may be on that storage. You get away from that. So cloud providers now have the flexibility to actually tier your VMs and house them, and maybe a little bit slower, cheaper for them, the cloud provider, to provide. It's housing the VMs that are being replicated, and if you have an outage, then they just move those VMs over to the higher performing storage that's costlier to them, but they can offer that during your non-disruptive testing or an actual failover. So that gets you to the point of it gets you away from that top-down affinity grouping that the application owners had to do. Now we can really look more at a tiered approach, or just select all of the VMs in those virtual protection groups, as Gabe was showing you, to where it could be on any storage, but the target can also be on any storage. It's being replicated at the hypervisor level. So now we're free again from the physical constraints with the data store volumes. So next slide, there you go. So here's a bit of a summary that Zerto has on their site and in their materials that you'll see. Cloud BCDR must-haves. This is the key that when Zerto announced that they had a cloud-ready hypervisor-based DR solution or replication solution that actually works as vCloud Director and is integrated with vCloud Director to where it performs seamlessly, it meets the smell test here of it's cloud ready. It's hardware agnostic, it's very flexible and very scalable. Zerto from the very beginning, when I saw them, they were geared toward enterprise class replication. And security and manageability, of course, we need to isolate each client or each customer into their own fenced environment, and then because that serves the multi-tenancy approach. So we want to leave plenty of time for questions and answers. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer, and we will prepare to answer questions.
Okay, great. As Gil mentioned, you can use the question feature to ask us any questions that you might have. We do have quite a few that have come in. Before we jump into the questions, I just also want to point out that if you go to the attachments button, we have a couple of white papers there for you as well if you'd like to take a look at those. First question. What other BCDR trends are each of you seeing in the enterprise? So Gabe, why don't we start with you with that question?
In the enterprise, I nowadays see that more and more people are looking into array-based replication and moving away from it and looking at how can we recover applications, so services. And especially now with the vCloud Director making a big turnover right now. More and more people are looking into how can we use vCloud Director
if we use vCloud Director, can it be failed over to other data center? And that's the directions things are heading right now.
Great. Shannon and Gil, do you have anything to add to Gabe's answer?
I think get really right. From my experience with even deploying the array-based replication, there was a great deal of interest in the hypervisor replication because of the server teams that generally administer from the infrastructure level. They're able to select, get those replicated over to the remote site. So what I saw, deploy to Gabe's point, they're like looking at as soon as it's integrated, which it with Zerto, I've deployed it too, and it is that's a very attractive solution to enterprises because of the that I kind of getting away from the constraint. This happens to be a storage one.
One quick thing I would add is that what we see in many enterprises of all sizes, also the smaller ones and the larger, and the medium and the larger ones, is like RPOs and RTOs, like recovery point objective and recovery time objective, are getting shorter. People that said previously, hey, backup is enough, and then there were a lot of outages in the last few years, either for natural disasters or for other like power outages or whatever. People start experiencing life without their IT for a couple of days, or 3 or 4 days in some cases, or a week or 2 weeks, and they figure out we cannot really operate like that. So we see a lot of movement towards, yes, I actually need more of a real disaster recovery when I can get where I can get my business up and running within a couple of minutes instead of, or I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes instead of waiting for a couple of days. So also I see a trend of moving towards more of the real disaster recovery type solutions. Jen, next question for us.
Great. So there are a couple of questions around vCloud Director. So the first one is, can you walk us through a scenario of why vCloud Director integration is important?
So I'll take that. vCloud Director integration is important mostly if you're a cloud provider, because that's where most of vCloud Director installations are. If you are an enterprise using vCloud Director, it's also important. The key to vCloud Director is that vCloud Director abstracts the entire infrastructure from and provides kind of like limited type of virtual data centers for the vCloud Director users. When you integrate to vCloud Director, like for example Zerto is, it means that you can actually take any VApp within any org VCD, and within a click of a button say I want to replicate that VApp to a different vCloud Director or a different vSphere environment. Same goes the other way around. You can go to a vSphere environment, for example, if this is an enterprise replicated to the cloud and the cloud has vCloud Director. On the enterprise side, you just group a number of VMs and say, okay, this group needs to go to that org VDC, and Zerto will automatically replicate to the correct storage and cluster. And when you click failover test or failover, Zerto will create automatically a new VApp within that org VDC with all the networking and everything there. So if anybody is using vCloud Director without deep integration into vCloud Director, you cannot really use the power of vCloud Director, and you cannot really protect applications within vCloud Director or protect applications to vCloud Director. Jen, next one, and
okay.
You can have one that is not. Let's do the non-vCloud Director ones because vCloud Director is very specific.
Oh, okay. So someone had a question around, they want to understand how Zerto reduces bandwidth requirements.
So that's Zerto has basically impacting the bandwidth requirements in a couple of levels. First of all, Zerto has a built-in compression plus optimization and prioritization of the different streams of data. So different applications might get different priority. So at any given point in time, you are moving just the right data that you need to move. On top of that, because Zerto has two other reasons why it reduces bandwidth. The first is because you're only replicating the virtual machines you want to. You don't replicate entire LANs, which might include lots of data that you don't want to replicate. So you really replicate, you really use the bandwidth only for what we really need to protect. The last piece is that whenever Zerto needs to do a synchronization or catch up or anything like that, the comparison between the target site and the source site are done in a very efficient manner without copying any bytes of data that are actually present in both ends. So very quick synchronization.
Okay, great. And then someone asked, are there any constraints on hypervisor replication in terms of distance between data centers and the problems with synchronous versus asynchronous replication that this causes?
Shannon, do you want to take that?
I think the primarily would affect latency. So if it fits into your RPO, then the way that Zerto does it, I think, feels then maybe what you may be thinking as far as a snapshot, and then queuing it up on the primary site and then copying it up. It is that way. So I know Gil's got deeper knowledge into it, but you know, a bit at a time, almost it feels that way. So biggest impact will be latency.
So I think Shannon was breaking up a little bit there. So basically, to regroup what he said that basically the impact is mostly on, you know, the latency will dictate your RPO, since hypervisor-based replication like Zerto is doing continuous block level replication, but it's asynchronous. So whatever the latency on the network will actually dictate your RPO, which in normal situations is a few seconds. But other than that, actually hypervisor-based replication is built for really long distances. We have, I know of customers replicating between coast to coast in the United States and all the way between continents, all the way from the Middle East to the US. And so it's definitely built specifically for long distances. Jennifer?
Okay, the next question is, how well does hypervisor-based replication scale?
So actually, the fact that just like, you know, server-based virtualization server virtualization and security virtualization are the key for scalability. Same with hypervisor-based replication. It actually enables it to scale much better because each. I won't go into the architecture. You can we can always go that offline with anybody that is interested. But the key to hypervisor-based replication is that each host only handles loads, replication load of that specific host. So you don't get any cross-host traffic. You don't get any loads between hosts. So actually, the architecture is built to get really, really high scales, all the way up to thousands and thousands of VMs being replicated between different sites.
Great. So the next question, does Zerto's management console integrate with vCenter or vCloud Director? So
actually, it integrates with both. In a normal environment where you don't have vCloud Director, you will be using Zerto as a tab within vCenter, and that's the entire control of Zerto is from that tab. You don't have any other user interface that you need to interact with, and also that from that tab you control all of the components of Zerto. In the case where you have vCloud Director, you will also you basically will have the option of either using it through vCenter that resides behind vCloud Director, or through vCloud Director, you basically interact with the vApps, and Zerto will be doing whatever needs to be done behind the scenes for you.
Okay. We have one more question on vCloud Director. So someone asked, is vCloud Director a requirement for multi-tenancy? And if not, what does Zerto provide as a replacement? So Gil, do you want to try that one?
Yes, certainly. So Zerto is a highly multi-tenant solution from an architecture point of view. We enable protecting different workloads from different sites into a single shared cluster with a single shared storage, while separating different networks and different data paths. So it's built really in, and you don't need separate vCenters, you don't need separate entities for any type. The only thing is that when you have vCloud Director, you also use vCloud Director. You also use vCloud Director to manage on top of that the customer environment. If you don't have vCloud Director, then you're using vCenter or whatever, then you can use Zerto with that. It's definitely not a necessity. If you have vCloud Director, Zerto integrates to vCloud Director. If you don't have vCloud Director, Zerto still offers the full multi-tenancy just as if you had vCloud Director. I hope that answered that question.
So the last question, because we do have this presentation will end promptly at 1:45 p.m. So what will the DR landscape look like next year and in 5 years? Gabe, why don't we start with you?
Well, as we see, more and more is moving into hypervisor-based replication. So I'm expecting more products to go into that way. You can also see SRAM is now with release 5. They now released also host-based replication. Unfortunately, the SRAM replication has a lot of drawbacks when using host replication. Jason Bocky has written a blog post on the disadvantages of host replication with SRAM. So that's something to look at. What I'm also expecting is still more array-based products developing. Well, those are actually the two big trends I see. Companies still holding on to array-based, and companies looking into new products in host-based replication.
Shannon, do you want to try and answer? Let's see if we can hear you well now.
Yeah, I think that one trend is companies are going to go away from physical DR, just like they did with their mission-critical apps in virtualization. I think that's definitely a trend for now on out.
I will just add one more trend that I definitely see out there in the market, and it's more of a convergence, is that backup and DR are no longer considered different things. There's lots of people that are looking at, hey, can I use my replicated data also for my longer retention? Some look at backup and shipping backup snapshots as a way of DR. There's a lot of conversions in this, and eventually the business owners want to say, hey, I want to dictate an SLA for this application, both for short-term retention, for disaster recovery, and for long-term retention, and I don't really care what's the underlying technology that is used, as long as I can get a single view that tells me that I'm okay, I have my checkpoints in place, and I can recover whenever I want, to whatever point in time I want to recover, which is kind of like where technologies like Zerto and other vendors in the market are going towards, like this consolidated backup and replication type solution. So with that, since we are on at the end of our time, I would like to thank very much both Jennifer for moderating this webinar, and Gabe and Shannon for taking part in this. I would like to thank all of you and remind you that if you need more information, you have our email addresses here on the screen, or you can visit our website at zerto.com, or you can visit us in VMworld, where we're going to be exhibiting in a booth, and you can come in and see a live demo and see much more and get much more information on hypervisor-based replication or Zerto. So we'll be at booth 624. So thank you very much for your time today. Thanks.